right, welcome everyone. Really glad to be here with you today and with our special guest, Cheryl Pahaham, an activist in New York for equity issues, particularly around housing, displacement, and the importance of the intersection of how we're defining community. I think it's one of the things that we're trying to do with this series at PHN DEI in terms of finding these wider perspectives of sustainability and how Passive House fits into that and can help support or work against it, perhaps unintentionally, and what we need to be thinking about as Passive House practitioners. I'm really glad to also have Eddie Voltaire here with us as well. Before we get started, just a couple of words about the Passive House Network. If you are new to us, we are a 501c3 national nonprofit. We're really focused on training, education, connecting folks, and really peer-to-peer knowledge sharing. And this session is one of those aspects of doing that. We have a national membership, regional chapters, and ongoing training and events online, in person, and in hybrid formats. We're affiliated with the Passive House Institute in Darmstadt, Germany, part of the global Passive House Association, International Passive House Association, and the North American Passive House Certifiers Circle, a group of building certifiers that we work with to increase Passive House capacity. So we encourage you to get involved beyond today and into the future. A couple of quick announcements. Yesterday, we just released a new report we're really proud of called Safe at Home, how all electric multifamily passive house buildings deliver comfortable, cost-effective climate resilience. And so this is really bringing together a few of the threads and more around building a sustainable future and what we're seeing in the marketplace today, and how we're kind of hitting a tipping point in some ways in passive house development and decarbonizing our built environment. So we encourage you, I'll drop a link into the chat. We encourage you to check it out, download it, have a read. We will be referring to it going forward with different events. Certainly at the conference, multifamily is a big part of it, community sustainability, some of the issues that we'll be speaking with here today and across the board. Regarding the conference, the early bird pricing ends on Monday. So if you want to get the best price, if you're thinking about going to the conference, do it now. It's priced affordably. We want a wide range of folks to attend and to be in the conversation. There are a bunch of different targeted discounts as well on top of the early bird. It's available both online streaming, so you don't necessarily have to go to Denver, but we'd love to see you in Denver if it was possible. And then CPHD trainings is the kind of core of what we do. We have a training starting this afternoon, which I'm excited to actually dip into for the Midwest and Rocky Mountains. And then starting September 6th, trainings for the Northeast and the Pacific regions. Those happen online, on demand, online live, and in person, a hybrid structure to make that happen. So let me briefly introduce this. The series PHN DEI is really a reoccurring event that we wanted to show real world case studies in efforts to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion. We wanted to show successes, the struggles, strategies in making equity a priority within our work in Passive House, but across our lives in the way we're thinking about everything. So we encourage you to submit questions in the chat to Cheryl as we go forward, and to Eddie in the discussion. They'll be having a conversation here today about these issues, and we'd love to have your contribution to the discussion through the chat. So I'm really happy to introduce Cheryl Pahaham. I just met her the other day. Very exciting. She has a PhD in psychology from the New School and a bachelor degree from Wesleyan University. A longtime employee in the New York State Comptroller's Office. She's also a community activist, organizing campaigns, serving on Community Board 12. She's a founding member of Community Supported Agriculture, the first community supported agricultural group north of 96th Street in Manhattan, and a leader of the Racial Impact Study Coalition in New York, which I'm sure we'll hear a bit about. And there's actually much more. So if you haven't seen her bio on the event page, I encourage you to check it out. It's also my privilege to welcome back Eddie Voltaire, sustainability professional, CPHT, and a PHN board member and a real driver of this program. So welcome everyone, welcome to you both. I hand the mic over.
Well, thank you, Ken, for the introductions. Cheryl, welcome to the PHN DEI event. Interestingly, activism has a way of drawing people together, and this is how I met Cheryl, through work in communities through New York City in preserving home ownership and just sustainability and just driving mechanism that ties passive house and work that other organizations such as the Racial Impact Study Coalition is doing. It really brings people together. So I'm glad that we're here having this conversation, and I'm glad that we have the participants, and we're looking forward to your questions. Cheryl, with that, I pass it off to you.
Okay, well, thanks for inviting me to talk. You were very helpful to us, Eddie, when we in the Racial Impact Study Coalition wanted to have an event on Governor's Island, which we held recently to kind of celebrate the passage of Local Law 78 of 2021, which you all are going to learn more about. But first, I just want to tell you a little bit about the community I live in North Manhattan, and how we came to be involved in the Racial Impact Study Coalition. So I live in Inwood, which is on the very northern tip of Manhattan. It's basically the last neighborhood before you move over into the mainland of the Bronx. And it's a really nice neighborhood. It's got a lot of parks and a lot of relatively affordable rental housing. In fact, most of the rental housing in our community is rent stabilized. And so it's become a place where people who are fleeing rents and higher housing costs in other parts of the city are moving to. And it's leading to other people moving out, moving to the Bronx. So there's this whole displacement thing going on because of market pressures. And so sometime, I think it was in 2015, the city announced that they would be rezoning Inwood. And this was something that our councilman supported. And we were a little bit slow at first to respond. I think it took some time for people to start thinking about, well, what is rezoning and how would it affect the community, and why should we care? Because who doesn't want more housing, right? Who doesn't want new housing? Who doesn't want amenities and improvements to, some of our existing assets like our parks? Who doesn't want those things? So people started to really think about it. And one of the main issues that brought us all together was this question of affordability, which to people outside of Inwood was a little bit challenging to grasp. You had a mayor and also our council member saying that they were going to be bringing affordable housing to Inwood and creating new housing opportunities for people. So no one understood why we had organized or why we were protesting. And it took a Herculean effort to really communicate this idea that yes, the housing would be subsidized, a lot of it, and it was being deemed affordable, but the floor, the minimum household income that was needed to pay the new rents in the new housing was $25,000 more a year than our median household income of people who were actually living in our community. So one of the most urgent issues was, half of the households in our community would not even be able to access any of this new housing. And this is a community we're talking about that does send people into the shelter system. So this became kind of like our central, rallying cry when we organized against the rezoning. And I don't know if any of you, saw any of the news about it, but it was, a multi-year effort that brought in so many people in the community. And it was supported in a huge way. The Met Council on Housing, which is a citywide tenants' rights organization that basically empowers tenants across New York City to, avail themselves of their rights, protect their housing, get repairs done. They have a tenant hotline. They organize workshops. They advocate for affordable housing policies. They advocate for protections to the rent laws for rent regulated housing. And so they were instrumental in helping to organize our community. They hired an organizer, sent somebody up there, and we really flourished. We had new tenant associations. We had people interacting and speaking with each other who normally wouldn't. There was no reason for them to come together, and Met Council really was a big factor in strengthening our community. So ultimately, we had all these dramatic protests. We took over a street. People sat down in the middle of traffic on Dyckman Street, which is a very busy street in our community. They took over the councilman's office. They occupied it for a few days. We had rallies, we had organizing, we participated in the whole land use process, submitted detailed comments, went to hearings, we published op-eds. We were very active as a community. There was no one person that stood out. It was really like a community-wide, participation that happened. And so the vote came, and there was another protest. We weren't going to stop protesting. People went down to the council and they dressed up in costumes and they sat up in the balconies. And when the council members were getting ready to vote yes on our rezoning package, they started throwing Monopoly money down onto the council floor, which really panicked, and they had to temporarily stop the hearing. But anyway, after they voted yes, that was when we decided we were going to do a lawsuit. And that was, there's no other. I think it's a little strange that, we have this land use policy and we do have due process rights, but they don't kick in until after a zoning is enacted and they start really making plans to, roll things out. And so that's when we said, okay, we're going to sue. We had some discussion about a federal fair housing lawsuit versus a state lawsuit. I, one, didn't think a state lawsuit was worth our time. But that's what we all decided we were going to do. We had a great attorney. He basically was very low cost. He gave us, now I wouldn't say pro bono, but pretty much pro bono, given the amount of time that he spent on it. And we got a favorable ruling in the state Supreme Court. And we were questioning in our case whether the city had adequately considered the impacts of its plans on protected classes like Blacks, Latinos, women and minority small business owners. And we had some other issues that were also critical that we raised about the environment specifically, but they turned out to be, I guess, less important, or they had less salience for some reason. But people were concerned about traffic. They were concerned about air quality. So we had raised quite a quite a few issues in the lawsuit, and we were ecstatic when we won. And then the following year went to the appellate division, and they knocked down. And what they said was really instructive. They told us, you know, this is not the way you make land use policy. You don't do it through the courts. You don't change land use policy that way. If you want to change land use policy, you got to go back to the council. So we said, okay. And that's when we decided to really get serious about the Racial Impact Study Coalition, which we've been a member of all along, and which had been working, you know, strenuously all along to pass what's called a Racial Impact Study Date. And this came out of another zoning or development fight, but in Brooklyn, and an organization called Churches United for Fair Housing. They had sued, and they lost their case. They produced a really, really important study looking at the effects of rezoning in Greenpoint, Williamsburg, and in Park Slope. And there were some interesting observations, like in Greenpoint, Williamsburg, they noted that the population between 2000 and I think it was 2015 or 2010, I can't remember the exact time period they used in the study, but there was a reduction of 15,000 Latinos by in population, I'm sorry, but there was an overall population increase of 20,000. And so that is to me, that was like a startling statistic about who left, who got pushed out, and who came in. And they made a very subtle point about the unintended effects of the Bloomberg rezonings from 2005, which was that they exacerbated displacement pressures that were already present and accelerated the displacement of people from those communities as a result. And it's not saying there's this direct straight line correlation between the rezonings, but I thought it was a good nuanced argument about the unintended effects of rezonings, and that happened as a result of not consciously examining the racial impacts of rezoning, proposed rezonings. And so they in the report, they proposed that the city start doing some kind of racial impact study when land actions are proposed, and that would be a much normative and conscious way to consider what are the potential unintended effects of the development that you want to do, and to prevent or mitigate those effects. So the Racial Impact Study Coalition is a group of tenant associations, community-based organizations like ANHD. We had the Regional Plan Association, we had the Municipal Art Society, we had tenant associations from Brooklyn and the Bronx. Our group, Inwood Legal Action, and Northern Manhattan is Not for Sale. These two organizations that organized in our community out of the rezoning fight, we were members. So we were meeting constantly. The law that became Local Law 78, it started out as one sentence and it developed into something much more comprehensive with input from interested city officials, from council members, and from all of the members of the coalition over time. So I think it was maybe a 3-year effort. And then in the summer of 2021, when there was a very competitive election going on in our city, we got the law enacted, and we wound up having very, very broad support from council members. We had the speaker, Corey Johnson, support it. We had our present speaker, Adrienne Adams. She was the chair of the Black, Latino, and Asian Caucus. She supported it. And obviously we had a strong sponsor in the public advocate, Jumaane Williams. And so it was just this massive citywide effort. But the work, the grunt work in terms of drafting legislation and doing the lobbying and advocacy, that was all the work of the Racial Impact Study Coalition, which was led by Alex Fennell, who was an organizer at CUF, and then she moved over to ANHD. But she was really doing this on her own, in her own time, and not paid during the pandemic. So, you know, we wouldn't be there without her. Every good campaign needs a great organizer as a leader to lead it and keep it moving and keep people together. And she was excellent. So going forward, our plan is to teach communities how to avail themselves of some of the benefits of the law, which we'll get into. So I think I would like to share my screen. I don't know if Eddie, if you want to comment, but what I was thinking is I would walk people through the Equitable Development Data Explorer, which was mandated as a result of the law, talk a little bit about the racial equity reports and the Displacement Risk Index, which are also, they come out of this law. So this law is basically a disclosure requirement for certain land use applicants. It pertains to housing of, it pertains to square footage and, you know, the size of a planned rezoning, but not every land use applicant is subject to this law, but many are. And the city has done an excellent job at rolling it out, I think, and helping people understand what it is and the data and the methodologies they use. Transparent. Okay, so I'm gonna go, I have no on my screen. Let's see. Oh, share content. There it is. So if I go, I say share content. I'm sorry.
You
Close
should
this.
be able to share and just share. I don't know if you're playing the video or not. You can share the audio as well.
I'm going to start out with just the website and I'll move around on the website. And okay, here we go. Where'd the share content go? Share content, screen, drive. So we're going to say screen, everything you do, start broadcast. And then, okay. All right, so then if I go here, do you see
We can see your screen.
Equitable? Okay, great. This is it. This is the website, and it's maintained by the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development and the New York City Department of City Planning. And it's designed for ease of use. So you can see, like, here's a map of New York City, and I'm sorry, move this over a little bit. If you just select a community district or a PUMA, you can get community data. Just trying to move this up so you can see the top. I'm working from an iPad. So you can get community data, or you can see the displacement risk map citywide and then get the detailed data that way. But if I just click community data and then move to the left, okay, I'm working from my iPad, so it's a little for me. You can see on the left panel, this is the Wakefield, Williamsbridge, and Woodlawn PUMA. It's pretty much contiguous with the Bronx Community District 12. And you get this data on the demographic conditions, household economic security, housing affordability, quality and security, and housing production and quality of life. So the demographic conditions, obviously it's, let me make this a little smaller so you can see it. Whoops. race, age, foreign born, limited in English. And this is excellent for communities because it doesn't require them to know how to get census data and tally it. There's no interpretation required. The data is here. So people know who lives in their communities, what their income and education levels are. So this is households by AMI band. And when you come to housing affordability, big question, how much are we spending on rent? So we've got the gross rent as a percentage of household income. How many rent stabilized apartments units are there? Rent affordable by AMI band. So AMI is the area median income. It's a HUD defined measure of income. I'm sure you've all heard of it, which is used to allocate funding subsidies for affordable housing. For example, here, extremely low income, 30% of AMI, this is very, very low income. There are 4,619 units of rental housing, and that's 14.8% of all of the units of rental housing here. This is just a fast, detailed snapshot of the housing market. And this kind of information, like if we had had this during our rezoning, we would have been able to challenge our council member to really change the plan and give us housing that was deeply affordable so that it would actually create opportunities for people in our district, and including the people who needed the housing the most. So this is that. All of this data can be downloaded right here. There's a download data button. Let's take a look at the displacement index. I'm sorry, let's go back. Okay. So if we go, so the displacement risk map is basically kind of like a heat map. This is a composite index that considers different demographic, housing, and economic factors. So it will consider things like population vulnerability, which pretty much is correlated with the percentage of non-white people, and I hate to use that term non-white, but it's a little bit more efficient in a community, and income. Market pressures considers things like housing costs, changes in rent compared to adjacent areas. They did a really good job at developing this index, and the city, and this is city planning and HPD, they really took their time to get public input to do something that ultimately they as experts were comfortable with, but also had buy-in from the public. And the result is this sort of heat map where you color is the highest and the palest color is the lowest level of displacement risk. But you can zoom in and you can pick a district. You can download the data, specific data on. So here are all of the measures. And then they also have, if you go on the city planning website, they have the methodology. Well, here it is right here. We can click it. So if you really want to understand how came up with these measures, you can read here, and it's plain English, it's accessible, and they are required to keep these resources up to date. Now, these can be used by communities to help them develop a to see whether a proposed development is their needs, and to make the case using data and their own stories about living in the community that maybe the city's plan should be modified to better meet their needs. And so we're just really excited. We believe this is a useful tool, and the Racial Impact Study Coalition members are going to be doing outreach all over the city to teach people how to use this tool. And if you on your own want to learn more, ANAD has done a series of online modules that are a series of short videos that you can look at on YouTube. And I think my web connection is really slow, but you can look at these on your own and you can see, why this is a valuable resource. If we had had this information during our Inwood rezoning fight, I don't know, maybe we would have gone in a slightly different direction in terms of negotiating with our councilmen, but we couldn't even get basic information such as, what are the rents going to be charged in the development? We got information, partial information, a little bit of information. We didn't get a lot of the information that is required now, and that's required up front, not after, long after or right before we're going to vote the community is at to support a rezoning. You get the information in advance so that you can have a better conversation. It's a little bit more level playing field. The racial equity reports are, sorry, let me go back to my Safari. The racial equity reports are reports that the developers are required to do. And they are available on the zoning application portal that the city has developed, which is this great, some of you may be familiar with it, I'm sure already, but when we were fighting the rezoning, this portal didn't exist. But they've made this thing so easy to use, it's unbelievable. You can take a look at the racial equity reports and see basically what developers think of their project and how the project will further cities' affordable housing goals. You can search for projects where a racial equity report is required, and then you can download the report and take a look at what they're saying. This is not going to go through because I think my connection is too slow, but that's pretty much it about local law 78 of 2021. It's basically a disclosure requirement that gives communities information that will help them participate more fully in developments that are proposed in their community and give them the ability to make better decisions about what's needed compared to what's being proposed. So let me stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Cheryl, for that excellent presentation. I mean, there's a lot of things that resonated with what you were saying, and particularly with affordability, the AMI, the costs is skyrocketing in one community, it's forcing displacement in another, right? These things are they piggyback off of each other and constantly circulate in this never-ending cycle that never seems to end. What I found interesting in your presentation is this idea around data. Who has accessibility to data and who could even afford to get this data and compile it? Now, when you look at the Eddy tool, it's a visualization of that data, but technically that data is compiled in spreadsheets, tons of spreadsheets that you need an analyst to go through that understands what they're looking at, right? So most communities don't have the resources to even quantify this data in a way that's presentable or understandable to them or the larger community at hand. So I think that's where this tool becomes very powerful. And additionally, you mentioned how the civil engagement aspect of the work that you did brought about the creation of this tool. It makes me think about a lot of other communities that's facing displacement, and they're now in a position to have that data readily available and determine as well the kinds of developments that they want within their communities, right? It's not every development that's quote unquote affordable is actually suitable for the community based on the cost of living and how it's skyrocketing. Some of these issues is what Passive House does address, right? The cost of living is substantially reduced, the quality of life is increased. So these things tend to go hand in hand. And I'm wondering, with such a robust data system, who's responsible for maintaining the data? This is actually a question that was brought up in the chat by John Garrison. Thank you, John, for your question. Right? It really ties into.
So the
No, right.
Go ahead.
No, you
So
can
the
answer yourself.
data, most of the data in it is from the Census Bureau, right? So the quality is very high. And then the calculations and index, those were put together by people from HPD, New York City Housing Preservation and Development, and city planning. So they're the ones who are going to have to make sure, taking the census data and do the calculations with the census data and update this every year. That's in the law. They might also be using the New York City Housing and Vacancy Survey data, which is also an excellent source of and unique. It doesn't ask the same questions as the census data about housing. And then they're also using some city administrative data. So New York City agencies that collect this data for their own purposes are maintaining that data. So I mean, so far it's been good. I don't know, I'll wait and see what happens next year.
Okay.
Now, as far as like, are they going to keep this current? I mean, they are required by law to update the EDI.
Okay. Well, that brings about another interesting question as well, right? The longevity of such applications and the power that an incoming administration has to do away with such tools. What are the safeguards that's put in place to ensure that this tool will be available in, say, the next 5 years, decade, moving forward?
Well, I think one really positive thing is that HPD and city planning staff were involved in developing the EDI and in commenting on legislation. And there was a lot of enthusiastic buy-in among the staff, and we had a strong working relationship with them. And so that's one important safeguard, that the lines of communication have been open. Another is basically the law itself that does require this to be maintained with data. So it would be alarming if, say, a mayor just decided, no, we're not going to update this, 2 years later, or however frequently they do it. And it depends on the data, because if you're using like the 5-year data, right? Maybe you don't want to update it every year. I don't know, but that's a decision for them. But I suspect that they're going to maintain it with integrity, and it's not a safeguard, but it's an expectation driven by our interactions with them and the law. I don't know if we want to sue the city to get them to. For example, right now, the New York City Housing and Vacancy Survey data, which is also an excellent data set that is produced by the Census Bureau under contract with the city. And it's been used for these reports that you see from the Rent Guidelines Board that provide a lot of detailed information about the housing market and housing conditions and the rent stabilized units and stuff. It's primarily used to decide whether we still need to have rent stabilization and to have this control over our rental market, right? Is there still a housing emergency that requires these controls? And typically it's produced, I think, every 3 years. And a new version came out for 2021, but they didn't release the microdata. So, and that's the first time I've ever seen that happen. They still haven't released the microdata. So that is a little bit of a warning sign that things could go a little bit awry. And there's no like public discussion of why they haven't released the microdata. And there are some questions that get asked in this survey that aren't asked in the American Community Survey. And it's unique to New York City, and it's an excellent high quality data set, but it is disturbing that they haven't released the data. Meanwhile, they're planning it's time for a new survey. So, I mean, unless there are other questions, there were a couple other comments I wanted to make about, affordable housing in the city, and they're kind of related to what you guys do. I just have this concern as someone who's seen, how landlords don't maintain their buildings and the effects that it has on tenants, and someone who's seen how we really have not such strong enforcement of the building codes and the housing codes, and it has a really detrimental effect on the morale of people who live in this housing. When you don't have gas working for a year, that's terrible. And you have to feed your kids when you're cooking on a hot plate, or you have leaks that don't repair, and you have mold and stuff. And I hope that you guys in your field will be thinking about ways to deal with that problem of maintenance and enforcement when you're advocating for policies for multifamily housing. Otherwise, renters are not in New York City. Most renters are not going to benefit from all of this money and all of these programs that are intended to make buildings more energy efficient, to reduce emissions, and modernize building systems so they're not relying on fossil fuels, because there's no incentive for landlords to make those kind of investments. There are no mandates that they do it. We have in New York City, we have, I think it was Local Law 97, but it doesn't seem to be much of a burden for landlords. It's not much of a change for them. They do periodically change their windows. Some of them do try to seal up their buildings, but they all do it. And there's nothing compelling them really to do it. On the other hand, I live in a co-op, and that law, which I think is a great law, it's a huge financial burden for my co-op. And it's a huge financial burden for co-ops generally in New York City. There are no subsidies for buildings like mine to help them, affordably transition from an oil heating system to something else. And it is expensive to electrify a building. So
Yeah.
I
No,
hope, in your work, you'll
well,
think about this,
within the Passive House Network, there's a lot of work that's taking place around policy and electrification, and just trying to get states to offer incentives that we can use to revitalize or retrofit old properties. Like you said, it's a major burden, and it's a real cost, right, that we don't have control over, right? So we need the states to step in and offer these subsidies to developments that might not necessarily meet the qualifications, such as local law 78, which requires a lot size of 50,000 square feet, right? So we're already, majority of the housing stock is already left out because the margins is already set way too high, right? 50,000 square feet is a lot of space. The majority of housing fall well below that threshold. And I think that within the work that Passive House do is making these things more obvious, where you have more manufacturers you have more contractors, developers that's getting involved, this actually drives down the price of development. So,
Well,
hypothetical question for you. How do you envision the EDI tool being used? How do developers or professionals within the AEC actually utilize this tool? I can see how a community can use it towards preservation. But now when an architect, an engineer, a developer wants to empower a community, how do you use this tool in order to do so? Is there a process for the city that incorporates the EDI tool?
so
Mandates it?
if you're a land use applicant, right, you're a developer and you meet the legal criteria that requires you to produce what's called a racial equity report, you have to pull the data from the EDI. You don't just include the statistics that you want. You have to use the EDI and use the data in there, including if you want the displacement risk index, you could use it and include a narrative about the community. But I think for developers, this might just feel a little perfunctory, but they are challenged somewhat because they do have to make an argument, a narrative about how what they're doing aligns with the city's fair housing and affordable housing goals. So it's a mandate, it's not an option. You're deemed required to produce a racial equity report. And so it's a little different for them. But if you were just somebody who was interested in using this tool, I think the EDI is a fast way to understand who lives where, right? And what their needs are, right? And what kind of housing is there. It's a fast way for somebody who's interested in development or housing or wants to do commercial development to really quickly understand what a community looks like. I think that's probably the starting point. I think really trying to engage with communities is work no matter what, whether you have the data or not. You have to actually do some work to get to know who the constituencies are and who to reach out to. And there's no data tool that's going to make that easier, but it will definitely enhance your knowledge about a community.
Yeah, I agree that there's no data set that can replace firsthand accounts of the community, which ties to the oral histories, right? Getting to know the people who live within these spaces and understanding their needs. Marshall, there was an interesting question here that I had jotted down for you. Where is it? Give me 1 second. Now, in other cities, do you see the EDI tool also being implemented? I know there's a lot of city planning that takes place in other cities, and they actually literally model after what's happening within New York City. And I was wondering if this is something that you're envisioning expanding into other states and being utilized in the same way.
Well, we have been in touch with housing activists from San Francisco, and they're interested in pushing for something similar, a similar mandate, like to make it a local law. And you know how it is when you're an activist and you're fighting for your community, it's not your full-time job. And sometimes you just get swept up by these constant battles. So I can't honestly say I'm up to date on whether they've moved forward, but these are conversations that we've been having with them. We had an online forum with a bunch of groups that were focused on equity in San Francisco to talk a little bit about this law and why it's beneficial and why it would be a good thing. So I think the idea is probably going to take off, especially in places where you have high cost housing. The cost of doing construction is high, the rents are high, and you have epic homelessness. So we have that in common with San Francisco and lots of places in California. And so we have to do something so that people get the information they need to protect themselves. And this was just one step.
Yeah. Well, activism within itself is contagious, right? It doesn't stay contained, and it branches out into other spaces, which is a beautiful thing. And I'm wondering that within the 80 tool, can it be utilized for regulation towards affordable housing, right? Real affordable housing. That you have all this data that the tool provide. What are the regulations that could be put in place that when this data is presented, that affordability becomes something that's actually pursued, right? We know the AMI doesn't necessarily work, but you can fudge those numbers, right? We see it all the time.
Well, one of the really good things about the EDI is that you will be able to tell whether you can afford the rents in projects that are being proposed, because it requires that developers disclose rent levels and their affordability at different income bands. So that's one of the good things about the disclosure requirement in the EDI. And I think the idea was that people would take that information and push politically to get more deeply affordable housing. Because can you seriously mandate that a developer do exactly what you want to do? No, you can't. And, you know, affordability is subsidized. So it's political. It's a political fight, but at least the data will support the call for deeper affordability. But I guess we can't take away the whole fight, but we can give people the data, and they have their own stories about their lived experience, and that together will empower them to demand something better. Because like in Inwood, the mayor was just not providing subsidies for deeply affordable housing. They were calling housing affordable for households that make $120,000, and our median household income at the time was $40,000. Half the households made less than $40,000 total. So,
It doesn't work.
there were subsidies in the plan, but not for that level of affordability that we needed. And that's where the political comes in. Like, how much is the city willing to commit, in terms of subsidies, and how much can you really expect to mandate a developer to do, right? In terms of affordability, those are political questions.
Yeah, and there's no easy answer to them. That is so layered, right? It becomes this issue where you have multiple municipalities or organizations and all these different actors involved, that nothing tends to get done as fast as we would like, right? So the editor
We even in Inwood, not to cut you off, but just to give you a sense of how political it is, in our rezoning fight among ourselves, we also had debates over what we should be demanding. Should we demand 100% affordability? And by that, we meant 100% affordable to those with the greatest housing needs. So that would be those households at the median and below in terms of income. And other people will say, no, that's just not realistic. They won't take us seriously. We should do 50%, So we actually fought over this among ourselves, right? But it's just a tough issue when the federal government is not really subsidizing deeply affordable permanent housing, and is instead pouring all this money into temporary housing for homeless people. So
yeah.
I see a lot of questions.
Care to take on a couple? Well, here's an interesting one.
Yeah,
Do developers need to disclose estimated utility bills based on the efficiency of the building? Hard to calculate, but equally important.
wow. Our law does not require that, but the city has, in their laws, I think it's called Local Law 97. The city has laws about emissions, and the intent is to reduce, which you know about these laws, I'm sure, to reduce building emissions. And so for those laws, they do have to do some reporting about energy and water use to the city.
Yeah.
But our law is really a land use law, our local law 78.
And even within those laws, there, I think with local law 97 is a minimum of 25,000 square feet. Again, the threshold is well above most residential housing.
Yeah, it covers a lot. It covers a lot of buildings, like multifamily buildings. Like our building, my building is a small co-op, but it is definitely covered. We do have to do reporting
Okay,
and get
so
graded on it.
okay, so how do you see the passive house community aiding in the use of these tools, the EDI tool, or even aiding buildings such as yourself that might fall into this threshold of low income or whatever that might be, right? How do we actively participate and take action alongside organizations such as the Racial Impact Study Coalition?
I think passive house could help by really recognizing the need, the actual need, and where we're hitting a brick wall. Like for co-ops like mine, we have serious affordability issues. We can't afford these investments. They're hard. And so if passive house could think about a pitch to state government of a particular set of strategies for buildings like mine to reduce emissions, and then push for subsidies that didn't have so many strings on them, so that we could access those subsidies instead of getting these really high interest rate commercial loans, because that's what we get. We don't get, mortgages like a single family home. We get these commercial loans, and they are deadly. The interest rates are just like too much. And say you've already taken, if you just took a loan out to get a new roof or whatever, you can't take another loan out. You can't do that. And you can't make the investments, and then you have the fees. So maybe, rolling back the fees or something. I mean, I think, if you were designing policies that multifamily buildings, Ken's saying you guys do have a pitch. If you were designing policies that buildings like mine could avail themselves of, and demanding that the state put some of that federal and state money that they've got for all of this, green building stuff toward that kind of work. I mean, that would be a win. And then for like a lot of the rental housing, like the rent stabilized stock, you have to deal with this maintenance issue. So, no landlord is going to create a more energy efficient, heating system if they're the type of guy to not fix the leaks in the roof, and they don't provide regular heat anyway. There's no incentive for them to do anything except continue to collect the rents. And so passive house has to make, pitches that appeal to landlords. I totally agree, Ken. Mandates are totally necessary, but it has to be mandates and subsidies. And it's almost like New York is going to have to pay for all of the horrible, building conditions. Some of these really bad landlords that don't maintain their buildings, somehow that has to be paid for by the public. Otherwise, all the changes that you guys are advocating that are good for the environment, that will reduce greenhouse gases, we can't make them.
Yeah. Well, Cheryl, I do appreciate you coming on today. I don't know if you have more time to take on one more question.
I don't know. I mean, I could do one more question if you really want to hear me.
Well, you know what? We do have Fred McGee, who participated in the Passive House conference previously, and he's been lighting up the chat room. So I want to kind of bring him on board for him to make a quick statement. Fred, if you don't mind taking your mic off mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Oh, you can. Cheryl, thank you so much. I'm going to be reaching out to you separately. I didn't know about this. I've been looking forward. I put my boys away, so I can participate in this. And I really thank you, Eddie. I just wanted to basically verbalize in recording how much I enjoyed your presentation. Thank you so much for your presentation. I learned a tremendous amount, stuff that I can use down here in Austin, the quote unquote fastest growing city in America. But as I put in the comments, unfortunately, we're really swimming upstream. New York City on this is an outlier. And most of the rest of the country is, they're moving in the direction of race neutrality, quote unquote. Like you cannot even mention race. Okay, it's really remarkable to see in a city like Austin, our little pale blue dot in the sea of red. For our Project Connect plan, which is our proposal to establish a rail system in the city, we had a multi-billion-dollar bond passed that was specifically designed to address questions of racial equity. Matter of fact, the creation of this plan was one of the incentives politicians used to get East Austin, which is where the minority populations are concentrated, to support the vote for the bond. Well, we found out about 6 months ago that race has been removed. The report has race all over it. It's literally called a racial equity tool, similar to what you've been discussing. And the city's lawyers said you can't use race, period. It's been scrubbed. And in the absence of any mention of race, what you're going to have is, I think we agree, because we're talking about public dollars, you're going to have the usual city hall ghouls with access to the money first, okay? And there really isn't much trickle down. And that's been kind of the Austin experience. Although the good part of your presentation about this tool that the city did in response to the passage of the racial equity ordinance or law that you guys passed, I'm going to try to push for that down here in Austin. And my last comment has to do with another multi-billion-dollar pot of money, and that's the Biden administration's Justice 40 initiative. I posted a link to an op-ed from the New York Times a week ago. That initiative is looking to collapse. You're probably familiar with the Environmental Justice Executive Order that President Clinton issued in 1994, which became incorporated into the NEPA process, okay, which talked about the fair treatment and meaningful involvement, and of course, involved using public health, using civil rights law and other sorts of things to make sure that proportionate impacts. And the Justice 40 initiative was designed to try to make sure that there would be an equitable funding stream for grassroots organizations like ours. Gone, because race has been removed from that as well. This at the federal level with the Biden administration. They're afraid of the Supreme Court, that's what we're hearing, and so forth and so on. So yeah, it's going to take some serious organizing. This is a political football this election season. In regards to Passive House, race and Passive House, there very much is a connection, okay? And it often is an environmental justice connection. It's a public health connection, because our populations suffer from maladies that have to do with the fact that we occupy housing stock that's unsafe, that's unhealthy, causing children to have asthma and all kinds of other health triggers. So that would be one thing that I would leave you with on that. And again, thank you so much. I look forward to engaging you in the future. I salute you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'll just say that, I mean, it's just because people are striking the word race from the conversation doesn't mean you can't pursue equity questions. There's a million ways to get at equity, income, obviously, wealth, obviously, health, you mentioned. There's transportation equity, the clearly always underserved communities when it comes to mass transit. So I wouldn't give up the fight about equity. Equity is more than race, although, obviously it's correlated often with race. So, but thank you for that.
So that is all our time for today. I just wanted to say there's a lot of comments about Passive House and what Passive House should be doing, and just to push forward DEI events. This is part of pushing forward DEI events, right? We bring people together to have this conversation, to connect people, to find new ways to keep this effort moving forward, and to create this space where it's not just talk, right? There's real action taking place. Right, so I'm glad Fred was able to come on and speak with you, and I'm looking forward to see how you guys can connect and expand this into Austin, Texas. And thank you for all of the other participants that stayed on a little bit longer with us today. We appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
All right. Care. Bye-bye.
Bye.